Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week, we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, the host of the podcast, and Hunter and Rich are joining me today. Welcome, guys. So glad you're here.
Yo, Autumn. Glad to be here.
Autumn, good to be here. Autumn looks like the Easter Bunny in August today. She has got a bright pink cardigan on, and I love it.
Great.
Could you give an analysis of what I'm wearing right now, too?
Rich just looks like himself.
The reason that we haven't put these podcast conversations on video yet is because no one needs to watch it. They get a commentary about my wardrobe really often anyway in the introduction.
Not every episode, but every now and then you are remarkable. And today your sweater is remarkable, and it should be celebrated.
Every
it isn't
time.
a warm August day, but the air conditioning in our offices can run a touch cool.
Yeah.
So always bring a cardigan.
That's good.
That's fair. It's better than hot.
Yeah.
Better than hot.
It is. It's
Every
better
time
than hot.
I've been here, you've made a comment about what autumn is dawning. So I'm just used to it at this point. I feel a little left out, but that's neither here nor there.
I mean, your Seeger hat that you're wearing, Rich, is on trend.
I want people to think that I'm a Western outdoorsy kind of man, which is only really not even half true.
And if you ever decide to take that hat off, you could just put it in one of those big pockets on the side of your shorts.
I believe we call those cargo
pockets. Yep.
Cargo pockets.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm living about a decade and a half behind the trends.
Nah, they're back.
Yeah. Oh, they're back?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
You know, if you're like 17 and buying clothes from American Eagle, you can find some cargo shorts.
Oh, sweet.
And you're a dad, so everything's on trend for you.
Yeah, that's right. Nothing matters.
Dad shorts.
Got my New Balance kicks. I was made fun of them the other day. Or somebody made fun of them the other day. And then somebody else chimed in and said, hey, they're actually kind of in right now.
Yeah, I have a pair of those that I mow the yard in.
Do you?
That seems right. All right. Well, I think it's my job now to point us in a different direction. So
Rein us in.
we are going to talk about the state of the church. A little bit of that pertains to the state of the church in America, in Denver. And then we'll mostly talk about, though, Fellowship Denver and our church family. And both of you are pastors here at Fellowship. And so I was curious to hear your thoughts on a number of questions related to the state of the church as it pertains to both Fellowship Denver and then, as I said, in our broader context. So today I get to just ask you both a bunch of questions, which is pretty fun for me to get to interview you. So I think probably our listeners are familiar with both of you. Both of you have been on the podcast before, but Hunter is the lead pastor here at Fellowship Denver, and Rich is lead pastor of our North Metro congregation, which is one of our two church congregations that meets up in Arvada. So thank you both for joining me today and agreeing to let me ask you a bunch of questions.
You're asking us things that like Rich and I just talk about all the time.
Yeah.
So this is an easy one for us. You kind of sent us some questions in advance, and we were like, oh yeah, we know how to do this.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't know how to condense it into podcast form,
right?
But we know how to riff on this.
Right. Yeah. It'll be fun.
Yeah, let's jump in. I organized our conversation in two movements. The first is a little bit broader. I called it Getting Our Bearings, or Where Are We? Kind of getting the lay of the land. And then in the second half of our conversation today, we'll talk more about fellowship and where we as a church family are headed this fall, what we can be mindful of together.
Great.
As we move into a new season. Fall always feels a little bit kind of fresh in the life of the church as families return from their summer travels, and really volunteers too. Everyone in our church, not just families. That's top of mind for me because I work with our families. But as everyone kind of returns from their summer travels and we start essentially a new year of ministry. So this is a great time to talk about where we're headed this fall as a church. But before we talk about fellowship, I did want to ask a couple of questions that capture more broadly some of the state of the church in America. And so my first question for both of you is that we can, I think we being our various church attenders, those who come to fellowship or people who are listening who attend other churches can pick up on different narratives in the media about the church in America. Some of that might have to do with the decline of church attendance in America, or caricatures that we see presented in the media, particularly right now in an election season, a time that's pretty politically fraught. There are different depictions of people of faith and how their political leanings are influencing this election or coming to the surface during an election year. So I don't actually want to steer our conversation into that political sphere, only to say that that is all true because of the nature of the conversation being had in different media outlets right now. So my question for you is, in light of all of that we know that these presentations are taking place in the media, how would you describe the state of the Christian church in America? So not a caricature of the church, but as best you can tell, the actuality of the Christian church, which includes various types and sizes. That's why this is a broad question in our country.
For one, I mean, the church is, there is a general decline happening within Christianity in the West. And we could kind of hang on that and get nervous and feel nervous. But I also think that, I don't think that I know that if you really kind of know certain people in certain places, one thing that I see right now is that there is like regional revival happening in different parts of the United States, like New York City. I see it in Kansas City with the Kansas City Underground. I see it with in Chicagoland, like churches that are actually being born. And although churches are yes, like shuttering their doors and they're closing up, the Lord is still doing significant work, and it seems that He's doing significant work regionally. In ways where He's connecting churches in a regional way to, turn their gaze to Him, where there's an intensity that comes upon them in their view of God and in their participation in His mission. And so I think that we hear some of these kind of mainstream talking points of, hey, the church is done, and we're in this post-Christian culture, and everything has kind of, the ship has sailed. But when you look a little bit more closely, and honestly, when you know the right people to listen to or to talk with, you begin to see that God's actually doing significant things all over the place. And there's really this act of differentiation that you need to do, because you hear all these negative stories about churches that are either like completely disregarding orthodoxy and going the progressive route. And then you hear some churches that are trying to buckle down and, hey, we want to, take over the state as much as possible. And this is the way to reintroduce Christendom to America or what have you. But the reality is that some of these mainstreamy sort of like arguments or what you see in the news, really you need to kind of step back and look where you're at and what God might be doing in your own church to get a really good understanding or a better understanding of what is happening.
And just to add to that, anytime there's massive cultural changes or shifts that are going on, it always introduces a level of confusion in the culture. Like, what do we do with this? And then that always also comes into the church. This happened in America in the early 20th century. There was massive cultural changes that were happening after the Civil War around especially the urbanization of a lot of our economic life, where we had kind of just been a rural country, a collection of small towns, essentially, with a few, cities that weren't nearly as big as what they are today. And then after the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution is happening. Factories are ramping up. People are moving in the cities. More life is centering in cities where it all used to be around the farms. And then the scientific revolution is happening. So we're discovering lots of stuff that we didn't know scientifically. We're trying to figure out how to integrate that into what we had assumed previously to be true. And that's all happening in the culture writ large, and the church is going, what do we do? How do we respond to this? And there was some people who said, well, we need to adapt or change the message of Christianity to be something that modern people will understand. And there are other people who said, no, we need to preserve the original Christianity. That would be my bent, by the way. This is why we say follow the original Jesus, you know. And then how do we do that, though, you know, and still engage people with whose lives are changing? So it was, and there wasn't like a real clear, coherent, unified answer across the church in America. There were just lots of answers being offered and lots of debate about it. I kind of see the same thing happening today. We're in a time of cultural change. Culture's always changing, but we're in maybe a time that's been particularly tense even in the last 10 years. If you think about the pandemic, if you think about the legalization of same-sex marriage and what that has done to kind of the impact that's had more broadly in our culture. If you think about changing attitudes about just sexuality in general, if you think about the impact that social media, which was hardly a thing 20 years ago, has had on our world, these are all very significant changes that many of us have lived through. And the church is trying to figure out, what do you do with all of this? And there's not a unified answer. There's just a lot of answers. And so there's a lot of debate happening in the American church right now. And that we can feel that.
Yeah.
There's an essay, I guess that's what you would call it, that Tim Keller wrote in 2023 about the decline and renewal of the American church. And some of what's echoed in that essay is exactly what you're saying here, that we're in a time of cultural shift. We've seen, especially since the 50s, a decline of the Protestant mainline denominations in the United States. And yet, Keller points out in that essay, which he wrote was published just a few months before his death, I think, in 2023, he points out that through this time when, as Rich, you mentioned, there's been a decrease in church attendance and in people self-identifying in polls and stuff as Christian or as committed Christians. Even through that decline in church attendance and the decline of the Protestant mainline, conservative or orthodox, as you're saying, Hunter, churches have remained, and in many cases, so to Rich's point, regionally, even begun to grow. So it is interesting to note all of those various factors at play in the church in America.
And I would think history would suggest, and even I can point to plenty of examples of this being true today, the churches that are doing well and growing in this this time of upheaval and lots of debate happening in the church at large, the churches that are growing are committed to original Christianity, and they're just doing the basic good things that churches do. They're doing the work of evangelism to share the gospel with people. They're discipling people in whatever place they are when they show up. They're helping them grow and form into disciples of Jesus. They're worshiping. They're raising children. They're developing leaders. They're just doing good, normal. They're forming communities. They're serving their city. They're just doing good, normal discipleship. And even when we aren't sure exactly how some of these big questions are going to play out, we can always come back and focus in on that.
Yeah.
That's some of what you're observing as you look at the church in America, just from a really broad perspective. How does this question apply to our context in Denver? Or to ask this more specifically, Hunter, what have you seen change in the church landscape in Denver in the past 20 years?
In the summer of 2000, I first came to Denver and lived here in that summer. That was 24 years ago. And then I moved here 19 years ago. So I feel like I've been watching the church here for 24 years now and really been aware. And what's evident to me is there's a lot of rising and falling of the church scene, you might call it. And by the church scene, I mean the collection of local churches. There's a lot of rising and falling in the history of our city and a lot of boom and bust among churches in the history of our city. That's not just true of churches. That's true of Denver's economic history. That's true of Denver's growth. They go through big boom seasons and then kind of bust or flat seasons. We're kind of a rise and fall, boom and bust town. And I've seen that happen in churches. To kind of drill down on that a little bit, there are far more vibrant churches in Denver, the city of Denver, like Denver proper, today than there was 24 years ago. Far more. I can think of a handful of larger churches, 1,000 plus people in the city of Denver that seem to have real both momentum and staying power. There's both movement and there's stability in these churches. There was no such church like that, not one, 24 years ago when I came here. And then there's quite a few newer churches that really seem to be getting traction here, and that even wasn't happening that much 24 years ago. So that's changed in the city proper. At the same time, over the last 24 years, there have been some big churches that have grown in the city proper and now have disappeared completely or are just a fraction in a shell of their former selves. So again, the boom and bust theme is there, right? Then if I look a little further out and I look at Denver metro area and I look at the suburbs, that 24 years ago, I could have pointed to a lot of vibrant churches in the suburbs, and I still can today. But some of those churches are different than they were 24 years ago. Some of the vibrant churches 24 years ago, some of them aren't here anymore. Some of them have declined. Some of the most vibrant churches today were not here 24 years ago. They literally did not exist 24 years ago. So this is our city. This kind of boom and bust, and I see that happening a lot. And often the booming and the busting, not this isn't an inviolable rule, but it is generally true. The booming and the busting is generally tied to the health of the church. Like it's growing when it's healthy and it's busting when it's unhealthy. And the health looks like they are proclaiming the gospel. They are discipling people. They're meeting people where they are and discipling them. They're doing good work to serve our city. The busting often looks like leadership scandal. It often looks like heresy, like really bad theology and departures from original Christianity. It often looks like sexual sin or condoning of sexual sin. Or it just looks like leaders getting burnt out and fried, and then the church kind of suffering as a result of the leaders falling out. So this has been the history the last 24 years, and I just kind of see it continuing.
So you're observing this kind of constant change in the rising and falling, or as you're using the terms boom and bust. Mm-hmm. Where do you think we are as far as we being the church in Denver? Where are we at in that cycle right now?
Generally speaking, I think it's a growth cycle right now. After COVID impacted churches in different ways, it was almost like a stress test of their health in many ways. And what happened was some of the churches that were really struggling going into COVID, they came out of it worse. And some of the churches that were really healthy have not only made it through COVID, but they've grown and really reached more people since then. So I think we're kind of in a growth period. I don't know if it's a boom or it's just it's a growth period right now. And what we need to pray for is that the Lord will give long-term sustainability to a lot of the good work that's growing right now.
Asking these questions about our institutional health in the church in Denver is one interesting aspect of being a Christian in Denver. Another part of knowing our local context is just understanding kind of the nature of the people who tend to populate the city that we live in. And as Rich and then the other pastor who oversees and leads our North Metro congregation, his name is Clark, as they have launched this new congregation or are leading it, one of the things that you guys, Rich, have put specific effort towards is just getting together with people, a whole bunch of different kinds of people, whoever will meet with you, particularly in the area of the city that you are focused on and live in and are trying to reach. And so this question is for you. What would you say is the flavor du jour of Denverites right now? Or in other words, what qualities or perspectives do you think are broadly true of people living in the Denver metro area?
Yeah. Denver is so dynamic. There's really good work and there's really good play. And that has a way of just like distracting someone from, honestly, distracting them from reality. It's like you get a good paycheck in order to have, and you live here, you probably have Friday off or at least a half day, and you go to the mountains and you do your thing. And what that really leads to is a lot of folks, I could probably explain it in two stories of two guys that I've met with over the past couple of weeks. One guy I met with came out here, finished up his grad school at Regis University, which is a Jesuit university. And he grew up in the church, has since left the church. And I'm sitting with him having coffee and we're talking about his story and we start talking about Jesus. And, I kind of explained the gospel to him. We talk about his hang-ups and he was like, wow, it's your perspective is interesting. And then he goes on to, maybe I'll start to just like ask some questions about universalism or maybe Buddhism. That's what he says. Like, that's how he says it. Right. So he says that in response to me just sitting and talking with him and kind of like asking his story oftentimes I'll just question the assumptions that people have. But what that shows me is he's just never done that. Mm-hmm. He's here doing his thing. And now he works as a physical therapist. He's making good money. He's very concerned about what he's doing this weekend. And he's just this younger single guy who is like, oh, maybe I'll think about universalism or Buddhism, which is just like, it like kind of seems a little silly. Like even when I say it, it's just like so out of nowhere and random, but it shows that he has never even thought about the lenses through which he sees life. And I sat down with a guy last night who's a barista in a coffee shop that I go to a lot, where I meet with these random people that I talk with. And this guy has grown up in Colorado. He has family here. He's a good dude. And he showed up very randomly at our church on Sunday. So we sat down last night and we had a beer together. And on Sunday, I was talking about we were preaching through Proverbs. I was talking about the wise path and the foolish path from Proverbs 4. And he sat down with me. He was like, Rich, it has been 2 decades of me not knowing what the hell I've been doing. That's what he said. Like, I don't know what I've been doing. I've just been kind of doing my life, and I don't know. I just haven't thought about what I've been doing. And he said that, and he like elaborated on it for probably 20 minutes. And he kept saying, I think I'm on the foolish path. I'm like, well, there's a chance. But part of the reason he has like admittedly found himself on this path of foolishness is his eyes haven't been open. His ears have been closed. He's just kind of been going through life with no real sense of what is it that I believe and what is it that I'm after and what is this thing. Like we know that eternity lies within the hearts of all men and women on the earth, right? So like, what are these questions in me? Like, is there more? There has to be more. Like these longings that we might have inside of us, even our desire for satisfaction. And he sat there with me and pretty much explained what I think is a reality for a lot of people in Denver is you can kind of get caught up in how wonderful this city is and all that it has to offer, but there's no real slowing down enough to be like, what is the world really all about? Mm-hmm. And when I stop the fun, when I stop kind of just like running after whatever I'm running after, a lot of people move to Denver just to run away from whatever's at home. So they don't want to turn their brains on. They don't want to kind of dig down deep in order to ask the questions of life and truth. ultimate reality, you know? So I would say that that is one thing that I see in most people. And what's really been a helpful thing is I sit down with these folks and like, there is something sweet that happens when you just begin to ask questions about even how people think and why they do what they do, why they believe what they believe. And the Lord really uses that actually. Yeah.
You know, a few weeks ago, I was talking with Michael, our student director, and we were talking about, I was really more asking him questions about the state of young adult culture in Denver. And I'm thinking primarily 20-somethings, maybe a little bit of 30-somethings, but 20-somethings and single. Like what's life like for them? And so we were talking about that and you know, I asked him, what do you think is the biggest struggle they have, whether they realize it's a struggle or not, and what's their biggest need? And he said that's easy. Their biggest struggle is foolishness, and their biggest need is wisdom. Their biggest struggle is they're unaware of how life works, or they're kind of clueless as to how life works, or maybe they're willfully ignorant. And what they really need is wisdom for how life works. And of course, we know that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. And that's true of people here in our city in general. The wisdom level is low. And I think it's lower than some other parts of the country I've lived in. I hate to say this to Denverites, but like, I think in general, the average level of wisdom among just pagans in Dallas is a little bit higher than it is here. And then there's a Christian version of this kind of foolishness, which is, I believe in Jesus and I understand the gospel and I profess faith in Christ and I'm part of the church in some sense. But I really don't consider the way the culture of the city that I live in and all of my life is step by step by step forming me and shaping me down a certain path. And so there's a lot of Christians who walk paths of foolishness, and what happens with that is they get a few years down the road and they wind up in a place that they didn't even realize they were headed and they don't want to be. And that often looks like my faith is not very vibrant anymore. If I'm honest, it's just something I kind of maybe intellectually profess, if I still even believe it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how I got here. Or it looks like I'm really disconnected from the kind of community and the kind of people who would draw my heart close to Christ and would make his kingdom a priority and help me be formed and shaped. I really don't have those people in my life. Instead, most of my friends are foolish. And that's kind of, there's a Christian version of this. So I get super burdened about that, you know, which is kind of one of the many reasons I'm excited that we're in a Proverbs series right now. But I get really burdened about that because I want so much more for people than that.
Yeah. Proverbs makes really clear that every action takes you somewhere. Like it's every step you take is going to take you somewhere. And that act, that step, right, maybe into foolishness, it changes you more than you realize. And it makes it easier for you to do it again. And it actually develops a certain type of character and leads you to a certain destiny in your life, if you want to use that terminology. And really, like, culturally speaking, our feelings are very elevated right now, and like feelings determine everything. And I don't want to like, I was trying to find a better way to say what I'm about to say, but I'm saying anyway. I don't want to poo-poo on that, right? But
disparage
that. Thank you. I'm not above simple slang like I use all the time in my life.
You poo-poo on things a lot.
But there is like so like our feelings, our emotions are an important thing that God has given us to understand the life we live and to help guide right and wrong decisions. But our actions do shape us as much as our feelings do. Like the head or the hands, excuse me, and the heart are a two-way street, and they actually inform one another. And we can't miss that, you know?
There's a place that these two trends that you're observing intersect, I think, or hopefully they will, in the consideration of churches in Denver and the kind of rises and falls. But Hunter, one thing you noted was the growth of some vibrant churches in the city and in the suburbs. And when you're saying vibrant churches, you mean churches that are committed to the historic Christian gospel, who are growing in number, partially from just witnessing to people and evangelizing and seeing people come to know Christ. When people, as you're observing, Rich, stop and start to ask those bigger questions, so maybe when they begin to become disillusioned with the things that culture holds out to them as assumptions, or to become disillusioned with just having enough money to go recreate as they want to, which does happen from time to time.
Yeah, they begin to poo-poo on those ideas.
They do. They begin to yeah. Mm-hmm, yep.
You don't need to say it. You don't need to say it.
But when that happens, and we can engage people in those moments, then pointing them towards something that is substantive in the gospel, towards I think, ultimate truth and the nature of reality beyond secular narratives or narratives that even pop up in various churches about just being a good person or being a nice person. And when those narratives fail, then the historic Christian gospel, the original Jesus, has answers and offers meaning beyond what any of those kinds of cultural tropes or trends or secular narratives can offer. And so hopefully, as these churches in Denver continue to grow, then we'll be able to encounter more people who have come to Denver for various reasons, but probably are living lives much like we just talked about, that essentially from the outside seem to be fine, good. Many Denverites are educated enough and have enough money to live a seemingly fun life. But we know that ultimately, so often they find that to be empty. So this leads us into the next question, which is, what does public witness look like in a city like ours then? So what are some contextual considerations for us as the family of God as we share faith with our friends and neighbors and coworkers in a place like Denver?
Well, I think it's living an intentional life to say the kingdom of God is the priority of my life. Now, by that, I'm not suggesting that you become a hermit or that you become a monk or a nun. You know, I'm not suggesting a kind of monasticism. Rather, I'm saying the kingdom of God is going to be the center of our life, and then we're going to let that orient our priorities. So we're going to let it orient how often we play and what formats we play versus how we work and we worship. We're going to let that orient our family life and our family rhythms if we have families. And when you live that way, you're just going to live a little bit differently than the normal Denver person. And hopefully you arrive at a place where you do enjoy the fun things that our city has to offer. I mean, this is God's world. Mm-hmm. It is still God's world, and His creation is still a blessing to us. And so we should enjoy creativity and enjoy His creation, and that's part of being a normal, healthy human being who, in the image of God, it's part of worship. And yet there's also this obvious priority of something more than just like, how can I have the ideal Instagram life or whatever. And so I just think that's a big part of our public witness. When we choose to live that way, it's impactful. You know, I just was a couple of weeks ago talking to someone who's making some decisions in their dating life that are countercultural. And in the process of doing that, they're having to identify as a follower of Christ. And I think that's amazing. You know, that's it, public witness at a ground level. This is someone who's going, I'm just not going to be formed and shaped by the way our city normally does dating. I'm just going to do this differently. And because this is a priority to me. God is a priority, and the kingdom of God's a priority, and following Jesus is my number one priority. So it sometimes just boils down to simple things like that, and we don't have to make it bigger or more grandiose than living a distinctive life.
I think sometimes we're afraid to live the life that God has for us because we're afraid that we're going to be labeled by those who aren't following Jesus as bigoted or small-minded or what have you. And although that might be true in some scenarios, there is a joy that is produced in the inner person in living that life and allowing for the kingdom of God to burst forth inside of you and through you and into your relationships and your families and your workplace. And that actually allows for the countercultural ways you're living to be wildly attractive to those around you, you know? And like I have friends who are just still like living the kind of single clubbing on the weekends, kind of like doing their thing, running after the most money, different kind of like bed every night of the weekend kind of life. And I got married younger. They thought I was crazy to do that. But then they see this joy and this beauty of where I'm at as a guy who has a family and's been married for 11 years. And like, I'm younger for that, especially in Denver, you know, and, but the reality is that people are attracted to the steadiness that the kingdom of God brings to people who, just really commit themselves to it and live for it.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Hunter, what you described as the just being distinct in the way you go about life, but doing that, just keeping it as simple as that. And I would add one thing to that, which we've talked about on the podcast before, and that is being willing to share your life. So living that way, not for yourself and because you believe it, right? But not ultimately even for that. We see that this kind of public witness includes a type of hospitality and a posture. And I think that that's something that both of you do. And Rich, particularly, as I've listened to you in these past couple of years describe your interactions with people and getting together with them at coffee shops, but also just literally having people over to hang out in your yard and share dinner and talk to them about the gospel and to share your life, your actual space, your physical presence, to welcome them in to your life in that way, I think is such an important and powerful part of public witness in any place, particularly in our city.
Yeah. You know, I think we make it more difficult than we need to at times, like to know people than to move towards those people that you know and to listen to the Spirit of God that's actually given to you to guide you. Like that's really all it requires. It does not require a theological degree. If you're actually living the life that God has asked you to live, that doesn't mean perfection. That means pursuing God in your daily life, right? You desire to be more like Christ. You desire to see other people know Jesus. You're maybe you're being discipled. If you're not, that's always good. Or maybe you're discipling someone. Like if you're like running after the things that God has given us to run after, as long as you like know people, you already do know people. Are you moving towards them? And then are you asking God what he's doing in them? You know, what's crazy is the guy I met with last night, I have known for 3 years and I've been praying that God would do something in him. And it's wild he showed up at church on Sunday, but it's more wild that we sat down last night. And that's just me knowing him. It's a barista of the coffee shop I always go to. It's moving towards him, consistently like caring about him, not just as a facade, but I just like ask him how his day is and I'm inquisitive about his life. And then last night as we sat there, like I was just asking the Lord to like prompt in me whatever is next. And that doesn't look like God showing up at the picnic table we were at. It looks like just certain things coming to mind and then actually being curious about them and inviting the Lord into the conversation that way. So it's possible to do that. And the Lord works pretty drastically in those times.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned earlier in our conversation that we're one church with two congregations. We have a congregation that meets in South Central Denver. We call that our South Broadway congregation. And then a congregation that meets in Arvada, and we call that our North Metro congregation. And so, but this fall, there are some things that our church as a whole is doing together, things we're looking forward to together, and then some ways that mission looks unique and our church family looks unique at each of our congregations. So what are we headed into this fall? And this can be collective or particular to either our South Broadway congregation or our North Metro congregation.
Well, I'll kind of back up and frame it up like this. In light of what we talked about earlier about kind of the trajectory that churches tend to follow in Denver, this boom and bust cycle, what I really want for us is I want depth, like that makes us a stable long-term presence in the city, but I also want movement. Like I don't want us just to be here, and I don't want us just to survive, and be a well-ordered organization that makes it for 20 more years. I want us to also reach more people and see movement. So a lot of what I'm thinking about for where we're headed as a church is about depth and movement at the same time. And I would say I'm really encouraged with our depth. We have great leadership depth. I think we have ministry depth. There's a core depth and stability to even our membership that, Autumn, I think you've been a big part of helping to see as we've fostered this just dynamic children's and families ministry. And so we're now like a place where children can grow up. Like we would not have been a church children could have grown up in 15 years ago. And that has really given our body some real depth. And I don't just mean like we have a building, and we've got a little money in the bank. I mean like we have people who are doing life in Denver in really intentional, credible ways. I think that a lot of the fruit's being born. You're helping to lead a lot of that. I want to say we've got that and we're doing well there. Let's make sure we keep an urgency toward movement. And I'm thinking in particular about young adults right now. And this, I mentioned that earlier, but I'm thinking about 20 and 30 somethings. There's always more 20 and 30 somethings in Denver. 5 years from now, there'll be a new crop of them, and there's always more. And that is our city. It's a young city, and we're in this city. So I want us to be a church that is not just for them, where they can come to church. I want us to be making intentional investments in that generation to see them become followers of Christ and to see this season of their life as intentional, and there's huge potential for movement. We have a lot of young people in our body right now. You lead an internship program that's full of young leaders. We have young leaders showing up. When I go to DNA group, I'm like, whoa, look at all the folks that are here. So I think there's some untapped potential there that I'm giving a lot of thought into how we just invest in them and continue to see that happen. So that's a big part of what's on my heart right now.
Yeah, there's I say it like this. This is me simplifying what Hunter just said.
Thank you. Please do.
We want to be a church that you ever go to somebody's house, like you ever go to a neighbor's house growing up, and you like see a cat inside their house, and you're like, I've seen that cat around the neighborhood. It's like an indoor and outdoor cat. Have you never had that? Maybe this is just a Jersey thing.
No, that was my cat growing up.
That was your cat. Yeah. Indoor and outdoor cat.
Idea how this is simplifying anything I just said.
Hey, listen. All right. This is that. I think that is the desire. It's my desire for sure. And I know you agree.
We want to be an indoor and outdoor kitty. Is that what you're saying?
Both an indoor, and we want to develop indoor and outdoor cats.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
I had an outdoor cat growing up. And if I have to choose, I'm taking an outdoor cat. She was amazing.
Yeah.
So,
but what I mean by that is maybe I'm not simplifying this. I think I am.
It's okay. Keep going. We want to know what
you're indoor and outdoor cats.
We want to know what you mean by this.
I'm asking, where do I give my life? Where do I sign up to give my life to this outdoor kitty vision? Indoor outdoor kitty vision.
Hunter and I talk enough to where I know he agrees with what I'm about to say. Hey, we want people to come to gather together as God's church, and there to be a depth there to where they could be met by other people within the body, and there could be just a hominess, a settledness, right? A revitalization that happens when we are together, when we're indoors, right? But we also want to be a sent people, right? This could also be gathered and sent, right? But we want to be a sent people to where like we can operate outside of when we're gathered really well and live on mission for God in the ways that He has for us, and we want to do both of those things on the regular, right? So for me, like we're seeing a lot of young people at North Metro, a lot of young professionals, and we're seeing a lot of new believers. So it's funny because we have a posture because we're newer. This is just the nature of a new church. This is why we plant churches, because it tends to be like, even statistically, like you see more converts, you see kind of more messy people show up to something that's newer than something that's like older and established. Not that it doesn't happen, it's just a little bit more common. And we're kind of leaning into, hey, we actually have a heck of a lot of development to do with these people that have been outdoor cats and they're coming in now. You know what I mean? And not that they're all feral, but it is, it's a reality that like we have the work of discipleship to do in our church in order to allow for them to even see the beauty of God's church, the beauty of community, and how they could grow in Jesus.
Yeah, I got it.
You got it.
The indoor cat returns home. That's where it's fed, it's watered, it has shelter, then it's confident enough to go out into the world.
Yeah.
Out there, it has poise,
Poise.
confidence,
Kills
can
things.
face whatever conflicts in the neighborhood come up, and then it returns home again.
Yeah.
Hey, I love that.
And then it goes
picture.
out again.
I love that picture.
I do too. And what I'm hearing us say is like
good.
at South Broadway, we have some of the depth that you're describing.
Yeah.
And it's time to really focus on the movement. And I think what you're describing at your stage of life in North Metro is we've got a lot of exciting kind of movement, and we need to bring depth to that so it lasts. So it's really just interesting how these two things in good gospel ministry, these two things are often going back and forth, and there's seasons where maybe you're trying to lean hard into one or lean hard into the other. I find that fascinating. And it's one of the fun things about being one church with two congregations that are in different seasons of life is we actually feed off each other in that way.
Yeah, it's been really good.
Historically, the Church of God in every time and every culture has grown through evangelism and church planting. So how is fellowship engaged in both of these?
Well, Rich has been rounding up church planters, and we're dreaming long term about church planting, but also we're going to introduce an idea this fall, and we're going to carry it over to the new year too, is just a very simple concept that Rich and I have been talking about. We've learned from some other churches, and this is just to invite everyone in our church to be prayerfully and relationally engaged with what we're going to call one more person. And prayerfully means I'm before God, and relationally means with them, one more person who God has just given us a burden that we would love to see them become a follower of Jesus. And we know they need that, and we may know they need that more than they know they need that. And so we're gonna go to our Father in heaven on their behalf, and we're gonna ask Him to move in them, and then we're gonna do what Rich was describing earlier. We're gonna, as we're praying, we're gonna be available to be used in their life. And I just hope we all have one person who we're pursuing God like that for, and we're also being intentionally relational with them.
And some of my prayer as we even approach this season of thinking about who is one more person we want to know and follow Jesus is that God would really God doesn't give us, God doesn't throw burdens on our back, but He actually lifts them, right? So, but I do think that there is a healthy weight that we must feel, that Paul feels in Romans chapter 9, where he is anguished to the point of he actually says he's willing to give up his salvation for his Jewish brothers and sisters so that they would follow Jesus, right? And some of my prayer going into this season is that God would give us such a real sense of lostness and even the people in our lives that we love that do not know Jesus, that it would push us to the point of feeling the weight of their eternal life separated from God himself. And sometimes we're a little afraid of that language because like the hellfire and brimstone we might have grew up with at whatever church, right? But there is this reality that there's an urgency to the gospel. We trust in the sovereignty of God. We trust that he is going to do what he needs to do, and he's going to save whom he is intended to save. But man, oh man, I think that I don't think God leaves anybody on the table who he intends to bring into his kingdom. But I do think that we leave our participation on the table when we do not go to the Lord in prayer and actually engage in the work of evangelism that he has given us to participate in. And man, like there's so many things that we miss out on. And I think there's so many people in our lives that we probably miss out on either like planting or watering like seed that God could actually allow for growth to happen in. We leave so much of that on the table because we do not go to him and actually like in a begging kind of desperate sense and ask him to do it. And I think it has a lot to do with like, we don't have a real great view of lostness. It doesn't grieve us to the point that it grieved Paul in Romans 9. It doesn't grieve us like it grieves the Lord. And, Spurgeon says something along the lines of like, you're not really praying for lost people until you're weeping for them. So like I'm praying for like wet carpets and floors that we're down on our faces on, asking the Lord to actually move and save people. It might sound drastic, but I just like the Lord's help me catch a vision for this lostness. And I desire for God's church to actually feel uneasy every time that we think about that, because we want to not only do we trust God in his sovereignty, but we want to participate in his redemptive plan. And that begins with thinking about one more person and asking the Lord to do something in them.
My final question today was, if you were to ask our people to join in prayer on behalf of Fellowship and the church in Denver this fall, what would you exhort them to pray for? And Rich, you just mentioned pray for this sense of urgency, that the way that we experience the gospel and rely on the Holy Spirit and listen to the promptings of the Holy Spirit would provoke in us a sense of urgency on behalf of our friends and neighbors and coworkers in the city. Hunter, how would you answer that question?
I would say ask God to give you a burden for one person, the way Rich just described. Ask him to show you who that is, and to give you a burden for one person, and be open to how he's going to answer that.
Yeah. And let me just say, like, if you pray what Hunter just said, like, the Lord will. Like, be patient, keep asking, but he will do that. I just think, like, I know he will. And that might come to you in a time that it's like, oh, wait, like this is some grand revelation. Or it might just be somebody who's like in your mind often. Trust the inclinations that kind of come up in your heart, because the Spirit of God resides within you. For those of you who believe, right? So I think that's a good prayer. Pray for one, that the Lord would show you that one, and then get on your knees regularly for that person and ask the Lord to do something.
Well, thank you both for spending time on the podcast with me today. For those of you listening, send us your questions, suggestions, topics, articles, anything you'd like to hear us discuss on the podcast in the future. We love hearing from you, and you can send all of that anytime to podcast@fellowshipdenver.org. Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Special thanks to Adam Englund for our theme music, to Jesse Cowan, our producer, and to Judd Connell, who provides transcription for these episodes.